It started with the sound of chainsaws. At first, Daniel thought he was dreaming, that the low, rhythmic growl outside his window was just part of the storm that had rumbled through the night before. But as the noise sharpened and splinters cracked against his porch, he bolted upright, heart thudding in his chest. Through the morning fog, he saw them. 3 men in neon vests, orange helmets, and heavy gloves, circling his front yard like vultures. And in the center of it all stood the old oak tree. 2 centuries old, its bark a labyrinth of scars, its roots buried deep enough to remember the revolution. His father used to say the tree was older than the town itself. And now they were cutting it down. Daniel rushed out barefoot, shouting over the roar of the chainsaws. "Hey, what are you doing?" One of the workers lowered his visor, gestured toward a clipboard, and yelled back, "HOA removal order!" Unsafe structure. Daniel froze. Unsafe? The tree had weathered hurricanes and lightning strikes, had stood through every season without so much as losing a limb. Who signed it? He demanded. But the man only pointed toward the street, where a white Lexus idled with its engine humming and its windows tinted. That's when he saw her, Judith Mayfield, the HOA president of Cedar Glen Estates, mid-50s, sharp blazer, phone glued to her hand. And that expression Daniel had come to hate over the past 3 years, the kind of smug smile that says, "I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm just following the rules." She stepped out, heels crunching on gravel, holding a folded notice like it was a royal decree. "Daniel," she called sweetly, "we issued multiple citations. That oak is within 10 feet of the sidewalk. It violates our visual uniformity standards and poses a risk to community infrastructure. You were given 30 days to comply." Daniel's voice broke. "That tree's older than this entire subdivision." Judith tilted her head, the way people do when they're pretending to care. "And I respect that. But emotional attachment doesn't override municipal safety codes." She nodded toward the workers. "Proceed!" The chainsaws screamed. Daniel's stomach turned as sawdust filled the air like yellow smoke. He couldn't breathe. Couldn't move. He wanted to throw himself in front of them, to stop them, but the police cruiser parked nearby made sure he didn't. The officer avoided his eyes. The trunk splintered with a final crack that echoed through the cul-de-sac like thunder. The oak collapsed, shaking the ground. The house shuddered. Silence followed. Daniel stood there for a long time, staring at the stump. The tree rings glowed faintly in the morning light. Each ring a memory. His father teaching him to carve initials. His mother hanging lanterns during summer picnics. His daughter climbing its branches the day she learned to walk. It wasn't just a tree. It was the anchor that held his family's history in place. Judith adjusted her sunglasses and handed him the citation. "You can file a formal complaint if you'd like," she said, voice sugary. "But as of now, the removal's complete. And since we discovered root intrusion under the sidewalk, the HOA will be billing you for replacement paving. You'll receive an invoice within 2 weeks." Then she turned, heels tapping, and disappeared into her car. Daniel didn't speak for hours. That night, when the neighborhood lights flickered on, he sat on the porch staring at the empty spot in his yard, the ghost of the oak still there in his mind. Wind whispered through nothing. The silence hurt more than the noise ever had. But as he sat there, a strange thing happened. His dog, Scout, started scratching near the base of the stump. At first, Daniel thought it was just the smell of fresh wood. But Scout kept whining, digging, pawing until dirt sprayed across the grass. "Hey, stop!" Daniel said, stepping closer. The dog backed away, and Daniel noticed it, a piece of metal glinting faintly from the soil. He crouched, brushed the dirt aside, and uncovered the edge of something rectangular and old. A rusted iron hinge. He froze. The stump wasn't sitting on solid ground anymore. There was a cavity beneath it, maybe a foot deep, maybe more. He grabbed a flashlight, crouched down, and began digging with his hands. The soil was dense, heavy, and cold. Within minutes, he uncovered what looked like an old wooden panel. He pulled harder until the ground gave way, revealing a narrow wooden hatch. It wasn't the roots that made the ground unstable. It was what lay under them. Daniel lifted the hatch carefully. The hinges creaked like bones. A smell rose, old paper, damp wood, and something else, faint but metallic. He angled the flashlight down. The beam revealed a narrow tunnel lined with rotted boards and old concrete. Someone had dug this long before the HOA existed. He sat back on his heels, heart pounding. Why would the HOA call the tree unsafe unless they knew what was under it? Judith's urgency suddenly made sense. She hadn't just wanted the tree gone for aesthetics. She wanted access to whatever was buried beneath it. He replaced the hatch, covered it loosely with soil, and went inside, locking the door behind him. That night he couldn't sleep. The chainsaw's echo looped in his head, but now it blended with a new sound. The creak of the hatch, the whisper of what lay below. The next morning, Daniel did what he always did when things didn't add up. He went to the county records office. He'd lived in Cedar Glen for 15 years, and his father had owned that property for 40 before that. The land deed went back to 1894, signed by the town's founder, William Redfern. Daniel had seen it once when he inherited the property, but now, as he searched the database, he noticed something strange. The parcel ID on his deed didn't match the current HOA maps. On their version, his yard was listed as Community Easement, Parcel C2. Someone had re-registered his property. He printed every document he could find, ownership records, boundary surveys, municipal permits, and took them home. Laying them on the kitchen table, he saw the pattern forming. 4 months ago, the HOA had quietly filed a zoning adjustment request. The justification, stabilization of heritage tree site for future memorial installation. The signature? Judith Mayfield, Daniel's fists clenched. They'd planned this for months, and if they'd falsified zoning, there had to be a reason, something worth hiding. That evening, after sunset, Daniel returned to the stump with a crowbar, flashlight, and a notebook. He waited until the streetlights flickered on and the cul-de-sac fell silent. Then, one by one, he pried open the hatch again. This time he went in. The tunnel sloped downward, only about 4 feet wide, lined with timber beams eaten by termites. The air was damp, heavy with the smell of old soil. He crawled forward on his hands and knees, light flickering across what looked like old brick walls beneath the concrete foundations. After about 20 feet, he saw something glinting on the ground, a corroded metal box half buried in mud. He brushed it clean. Stamped across the lid were the initials W.R. William Redfern. Daniel's breath caught. He opened it carefully. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were dozens of papers, old deeds, letters, and maps. But one sheet stood out, a faded survey map of Cedar Glen's land boundaries. Except these lines didn't match the modern ones. The map showed the entire HOA subdivision sitting on property marked as Redfern Family Estate, private use only. Daniel sat in the dirt, staring at it. The entire neighborhood, 162 homes, might be built on land that was never legally transferred. He climbed out just before dawn, filthy and shaking. He didn't know what this meant yet, but he knew one thing for sure. The HOA hadn't destroyed his tree because it was unsafe. They destroyed it because it was hiding their biggest secret, and he was going to dig until he uncovered every piece of it. Daniel barely slept that night. Every creak of the house sounded like footsteps. Every gust of wind seemed to whisper through that missing oak, echoing its absence. He sat in the living room with the box from the tunnel beside him, oilcloth still damp with soil. He'd cleaned one document carefully, the survey map, but there were more. Letters written in looping ink, some stamped with county seals from the 1920s, others burned around the edges. He laid them out under a desk lamp, piecing together the story they told. It wasn't just a map, it was a chain of ownership. The land Cedar Glen now sat on had never been officially subdivided. Redfern's will, dated 1901, left the property to his grandson, Samuel, in perpetuity and unsevered by claim or ordinance. The transfer deeds stopped there. But the HOA's entire neighborhood existed on it, which meant Judith's HOA was sitting on illegal land. Daniel grabbed his phone and recorded everything. Time, document scans. He'd learned from past fights with the HOA that you always keep proof. But this was different. This wasn't about mailbox colors or trash bins left too long on the curb. This was fraud. The next morning, he called County Clerk Mary Beth Granger, an old friend of his late father's. She sounded tired, her voice cautious. "Dan, you shouldn't be digging into this. I've seen zoning records moved before, but this one's special. It came from the County Planning Commission itself. Top-down order. The HOA petitioned it under the Preservation Renewal Program." "Preservation?" Daniel laughed bitterly. "They cut down a 200-year-old tree." "I know," Mary Beth sighed. "And that's the part that doesn't make sense. Their permit was approved for structural excavation and soil stabilization. That's not normal landscaping language. Someone signed off without inspection." She paused. "And whoever did it doesn't want you asking questions." Daniel thanked her quietly and hung up. The line between curiosity and danger had just blurred. Later that afternoon, he went to the HOA office, a converted home at the subdivision's entrance. Judith wasn't there, but her assistant, Lacey, greeted him with that thin, insincere smile everyone in Cedar Glen had perfected. "Can I help you, Mr. Grant?" He held up a copy of the removal order. "You can tell me who signed this permit?" Lacey hesitated. "That's confidential HOA documentation. Not if it involves county land," Daniel said evenly. "I've already spoken with the clerk's office. They said you filed this as a heritage safety measure." "That's fraud." Lacey's expression shifted, a flicker of fear before she masked it. "You'll have to speak with Mrs. Mayfield directly." "I plan to," he said, turning to leave. "And when I do, I'll bring a copy of her signature from the county's zoning archive. Because I don't think it's hers." That night, Daniel spread the documents across his dining table again. He noticed something he'd missed before. Several letters addressed to the Redfern Estate Trust, CO Town Hall, Cedar Glen. The return address was dated 1958, decades before the HOA even existed. He searched the name online and found nothing. Then, buried in an archived PDF, he found an old local newspaper clipping, 1958, Redfern Family Legacy Fund established to preserve historic boundaries and town heritage. A trust. Still active. He followed the paper trail to the Colorado Property Archives, digging until his computer screen blurred. And there it was, an active EIN number, filed annually, current through last year. Trustees, 2 names. One struck him cold. Judith Mayfield. She wasn't just the HOA president. She was the trustee of the Redfern Fund, the same entity supposedly preserving his land. Daniel's pulse quickened. If she controlled the trust, she controlled the land. And if she cut down the oak, maybe it wasn't to remove it. Maybe it was to erase the last visible proof of where the true property line once stood. That night, Daniel returned to the tunnel again. The air was colder now, the smell of old soil thicker. He brought his camera, recording every foot of his progress. At the end of the corridor where he'd found the box, he noticed something new. A small brick alcove he hadn't seen before, partially sealed with concrete. Someone had patched it decades ago. He tapped it lightly. The sound was hollow. After 20 minutes with a chisel, the concrete gave way. Behind it was another box, metal this time, heavier, sealed with wax around the edges. He pried it open slowly. Inside were photos, black and white curled from age. One showed men in suits standing beside a massive oak, the same tree, with a survey crew in the background. The date scrawled in ink read May 1931. Another showed construction crews breaking ground, the early foundations of Cedar Glen Estates. But the most shocking image was the last one. A man standing beside a young Judith, barely 20, in front of a sign that read, Redfern Historical Restoration Project, funded by Mayfield Holdings, LLC. Judith had been here from the start. He scanned the documents and photos into his laptop, uploading copies to a cloud folder. If anything happened to him, the truth wouldn't disappear. But he needed help. He called Mary Beth again. "I found something," he said. "Proof that the HOA land isn't theirs, and that Judith's been using a dormant trust to launder ownership." She went silent for a moment. "Dan," she whispered, "be careful. The Mayfields go way back. Her father used to sit on the zoning commission. Her husband was a developer. You're not just poking the bear, you're kicking the nest." The next morning, he woke to find a letter taped to his door. No envelope. Just a typed note on HOA letterhead. Cease and desist. Unauthorized excavation of community easement property. Continued violations will result in immediate fines, legal action, and revocation of property access privileges. There was no signature, just Board of Directors, Cedar Glen HOA. He crumpled it in his hand. They knew. 2 hours later, as he drove to town, he noticed a black SUV trailing him. At first, he dismissed it, a coincidence. But when he turned into the gas station, the SUV idled across the street. When he pulled out again, it followed for 5 blocks before disappearing near the main road. Daniel called Mary Beth once more. "If something happens to me," he said, "the files are in a drive folder named Redfern Truth. Password is Oak 1911. She told him to come straight to her office. When he arrived, she looked pale. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "The Redfern Trust's assets were transferred last week to Cedar Glen Holdings." "Who owns that?" She slid him a printout. "Judith Mayfield, and 3 board members from the HOA. It hit him like a punch. They'd consolidated everything. The trust, the land, the funds, all under one corporate shell. They're preparing to sell," Mary Beth said. "Developers have been sniffing around for months. There's talk of a luxury golf resort." Daniel felt the room tilt. They're going to erase everything, he muttered. The tree, the history, even the records. He looked down at the dirt under his fingernails, the same dirt that had hidden the truth for 100 years, and made a decision. If the HOA wanted war, they'd get one. But this time the town would hear the whole story. For 2 days, Daniel didn't go near the tunnel, the stump, or even the front porch. He sat at his desk printing copies of every document he had: Redfern's original will, the forged permits, Judith's trustee filings, and the 1931 photo that tied her to the land's first development. He could hear his father's voice in the back of his mind. You fight dishonor with daylight. So he decided to flood Cedar Glen with light. He called Mary Beth, who agreed to set up an emergency zoning review hearing. He called local reporter Kara Dunn from the Canyon Post, a small-town paper that loved a good scandal. He even called his old friend, lawyer Eric Lowell, who'd once specialized in land use cases. When Daniel explained everything, Eric was silent for a long moment, then said quietly, "You're sitting on a land fraud bomb, Dan. We're going to need to move fast." That night, Daniel drove out to the stump of the fallen oak. The moon hung low and orange over Cedar Glen, and for a moment he imagined the tree still there, its branches sweeping the stars, roots drinking from the hidden spring beneath. He knelt, ran his hand over the cut surface, and whispered, "You kept their secrets for a century. Now let's finish what you started." He placed a small camera inside the stump's hollow core, aimed toward the path leading from the HOA office. If anyone came to tamper again, he'd have proof. The next morning, Cedar Glen looked different. Pickup trucks with county logos were parked along the street. Curious neighbors peeked from windows. The zoning board had arrived with clipboards and body cams, escorted by Sheriff Wright himself. Judith came out in a beige suit, her usual calm replaced with visible panic. "This is unnecessary," she snapped. "These documents are privileged association property." Sheriff Wright folded his arms. "Ma'am, when a citizen files a verified claim of forged land transfers, it becomes our property too." Daniel stood beside Mary Beth, holding a binder thick as a phone book. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Kara Dunn's camera crew was already rolling, broadcasting live to the Canyon Post's social feed. The first hammer fell when Mary Beth produced the Redfern trust deed showing the land's perpetual family ownership. Then Eric Lowell handed over bank filings proving Judith's HOA account had funneled $640,000 from Preservation Fund grants into Cedar Glen Holdings, LLC. Judith's smile cracked. "Those are maintenance reimbursements," she said quickly. "Everything was approved through proper channels." Eric pointed at the page. "Except these signatures belong to county officials who retired 15 years ago." Murmurs rippled through the crowd of residents gathering near the sidewalks. For the first time, they saw Judith not as their confident leader, but as someone cornered by her own paperwork. At that exact moment, Daniel's phone buzzed, a live feed alert from the camera he'd hidden in the oak stump. He tapped it open. The display showed 2 men in HOA polos sneaking toward the stump with a gas can and shovel. Daniel turned the phone around so everyone could see. Kara Dunn zoomed in with her lens. Sheriff Wright barked to his deputies, "Go!" The men froze mid-stride as flashlights caught them. Within minutes, they were cuffed beside the patrol car, one of them mumbling, "She told us to burn it." "Said it was just debris." Judith's face went white. The sheriff turned to her. "You want to explain why your maintenance crew was about to destroy a registered heritage site?" I didn't authorize that," she stammered. Daniel finally spoke, his voice calm but cutting through the noise. "Every lie you told started under that tree. You erased it because it marked the boundary of land that never belonged to you. The hearing that followed was swift and brutal. The county presented Daniel's evidence first: photographs, recorded phone calls, and the sealed box of original deeds he'd found in the tunnel. Then Eric played the drone footage of Cedar Glen Holdings' secret excavation permit, which aimed to drill a well into the protected aquifer beneath his property. It wasn't about safety or preservation at all. The HOA had been preparing to sell groundwater rights to a resort developer for millions. When the board chair finally spoke, his voice carried across the silent room. "Mrs. Mayfield, this committee hereby refers the matter of fraudulent trust appropriation and illegal land use to the district attorney's office. Effective immediately, your HOA's operating license is suspended." The room erupted. Some residents shouted in disbelief. Others whispered apologies to Daniel. Judith sank into her chair, trembling. For a moment, Daniel felt almost sorry for her. Almost. 2 weeks later, federal investigators arrived. They seized HOA servers, bank accounts, and the deed records Judith had kept locked away for years. Cara Dunn's expose went viral statewide. Tree of Truth: How a 200-year-old oak uncovered the largest HOA fraud in county history. When it was over, Daniel returned to the stump one last time. County crews had fenced the area off, marking it as a future memorial park. He watched sunlight spill across the clearing, warming the fresh grass sprouting around the roots. The soil smelled clean again, alive. Mary Beth joined him quietly. "They're naming it Red Fern Oak Reserve," she said. "Because you reminded this town what real preservation means." Daniel smiled faintly. "No, because that tree never stopped protecting us." She squeezed his shoulder. "What will you do now?" "Keep the land," he said simply. "And make sure the next time someone buries the truth, they think twice before cutting it down." The camera of the story's imaginary film pulls back. Wide shot of Daniel standing beside the scar where the oak once towered, sunlight flaring through the new saplings planted in its place. The town behind him quieter, humbled. A caption could fade in for your viewers. "When you fight greed with truth, even roots cut down can grow back stronger." And with that, the HOA Things logo could appear, the narration closing softly. If you enjoyed this story, drop a comment, share where you're watching from, and remember, sometimes the smallest proof buried underground can shake an empire built on lies.